Good evening and welcome. I'd like to call the August 17th meeting of the City of Issaquah's Development Commission to order at 7 p.m. As a reminder, we do still have a remote aspect to our meetings. This means both staff and members of the public may be participating in the meeting remotely via WebEx. So our first item of business tonight is to take action on meeting minutes for July 6th and July 20th that we have in our agenda packet. Are there any corrections to the July 6th meetings provided in the packet? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. And are there any corrections to the July 20th minutes in the agenda packet? Thank you. Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Next, I'd like to open the floor for any members of the public, in person or virtually, who would like to make a general comment, not about the Towns on Issaquah project, but on general topics. There will be an opportunity later in the meeting for those who'd like to comment about the project on tonight's agenda. Those who are in person and signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you're in the room and you didn't sign up, I will ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. If you're joining us by computer or smartphone via WebEx and you'd like to make a comment, please raise your virtual hand. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right corner. It may also be located under the reactions menu or the more menu. If you're on the phone and not a computer, press *3 on your phone. For those making comments, please direct them to the Development Commission. For in-person attendees, please step up to the lectern. For meeting attendees participating virtually, when you're recognized, please unmute your microphone. When it's your turn to speak, state your name each time before speaking. Speak clearly, and especially if you're attending remotely, pause frequently, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. If you're attending virtually and do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost, the meeting will need to proceed. You're encouraged to rejoin the meeting if you're able to do so. Mr. Padua, has anyone signed up to make general public comments tonight?
Yes, Chair, we have several members of the audience signed up. But in recognition of tonight's public hearing, is there anyone that wants to make public comment on general public comment, not on the public hearing at this time? Can you raise your hand? Then no, Chair, no one wants to make general comment at this time.
Alrighty, thank you. Is there anyone online who would like to make a general comment?
Not seeing any raised hands. No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the main agenda item of the evening, the Community Conference for Towns on 7th. The purpose of this meeting is to provide the community an opportunity to participate in the permitting process, generate discussion, and understand the proposal with particular focus on critical areas on and off the project site. The order of tonight's meeting will be staff presentation first, and then there will be an applicant presentation. There will then be opportunity for public comment, and finally comment and questions by the Development Commission. So first we'll proceed with staff's presentation. I believe Ms. Holly Keaton is ready to go, so Ms. Keaton, please go ahead with your presentation whenever you are ready.
Good evening, thank you, and thank you everyone for participating tonight and taking time out of your evening to be here to provide comments and to be involved. I will start my presentation in just a moment. Please note that in the virtual world, we do have just a slight delay. Okay, so tonight we are having a community conference, and the purpose of the community conference, as was previously mentioned, is to encourage early public participation, to foster discussion between the community, the Development Commission, and the applicant, and look at big picture issues, and to work together productively to allow the Development Commission and the community to provide creative ideas, possible solutions, and feedback to the applicant on their project proposal. This project proposal is in the south portion of central Issaquah at the intersection of Newport Way and Northwest Holly. It is approximately 1.3 acres. The proposal is 29 townhome units, and it is proposed to be in seven separate buildings. There will be 58 parking stalls that will be required with those individual units. An internal access road is proposed with a through block passage and frontage improvements along 7th Avenue, Holly, and Newport. The permitting process, generally speaking, is that the applicant will be submitting shortly after this meeting, after they are able to hear comments from the public and the Development Commission and consider any impacts to their current plans. They will be proposing a binding site plan and site development permit, which will be reviewed along with SEPA. Once staff has done review of the proposal and is able to provide a recommendation to the Development Commission, we will come back to the Development Commission, and the Development Commission will hold a public hearing. If the Development Commission is able to approve what is proposed, the applicant will be able to move forward with construction permits. To go a little bit more in depth on the site, as I mentioned earlier, it's about 1.3 acres, and it is comprised of a total of 6 parcels. They are listed over on the left-hand side of the slide. This is within the central Issaquah area, and it is in the mixed-use residential zone. The proposed project is aligned with the comprehensive plan. The applicable standards are found within Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards, and the Architectural and Urban Design Manual also applies. The applicant has proposed arts and crafts architectural style. The Urban Design Manual outlines that the key components to that architectural style are that the massing is asymmetrical, that it is comprised of steeply pitched roofs, gabled or hipped roofs and dormers, intersecting ridges, and upper level balconies. This scale should be no greater than 5 stories in height, and there should be height variation to add visual interest. The materials for arts and crafts style are rustic stones, stucco, brick, and simulated wood, as well as real wood, masonry base, and decorative brick patterns throughout. A maximum of 3 of these types of materials may be used, and the color palette is to be warm whites, grays, olives, browns, and natural colors such as wood, stone, and masonry. The windows should be double hung, fixed, or a combination thereof, rectangular or arched with a brick or stone surround. They should be simple, and the doors should kind of match this design, so they should also be aligned with the style of the windows, and glass lit or full light glass doors. And brick and or stone surround should be at the doorway as well. The roof should be asphalt shingles, medium to dark earth tones, wood or simulated wood shingles, slate, concrete, or clay. This project will require improvements to circulation facilities. It will require both frontage improvements, as mentioned earlier, and through block passage. So first, let's look at the streets where the project fronts. This fronts on Newport Way, which is considered a parkway in the Central Issaquah standards. And the development standards that apply to a parkway are a 6-foot sidewalk, 6-foot landscaping strip, 5-foot bike lane, 11-foot travel lanes, and 12-foot median and turn lane. There is a project already in the works through Public Works city projects, and it is a roundabout that is going to be completing the design phase pretty soon, and it will be implemented in the next probably 5 years or so. So the developer is required to work very closely with Public Works and CPD, Community Planning and Development, on the design of the frontage for Newport. and that discussion is ongoing. Northwest Holly and 7th Avenue are currently unclassified streets in the Central Issaquah plan, and they are to be determined at time of development. Communication with Public Works has identified that the most closely related street classification is a core street for both of these. However, the difference is that on 7th, we will be requiring on-street parking. So each street will require 8-foot sidewalks, 6-foot landscaping strip, 5-foot bike lane, 10-foot travel lane, and then on 7th, an additional 8-foot wide parking strip. The through-block connection is proposed to go from Newport to 7th, and it will also be going to the north on the site to service units 25 through 28. It's going to be a 20-foot through-block passage with a 10-foot path and 5 feet of landscaping and amenity space on both sides. The project is required to meet the tree preservation standards outlined in Central Issaquah Plan. The minimum tree density is 4 significant trees per 5,000 square feet of developable area. The applicant is proposing a developable area of approximately 56,000 square feet. So you can see that that will equate to 45 trees to meet the minimum density. Tree retention is going to be 25% of the total caliber of all significant trees. And according to the information that the developer has provided at this stage, it looks like approximately 45 inches of existing caliper shall be retained. And that is able to be subtracted from the total minimum density. So if there is 2 trees on site that equal 45 inches caliper total, then those 2 will be subtracted from the 45, and the developer will be required to plant 43. To stay informed on this project, please contact me directly via email or my phone number, which is listed on the screen here. And to give you just a little bit of a heads up, the image at the top is what we have seen the proposal planning to move forward with. We'll now transition to the presentation by the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Keaton. So now we'll proceed with the applicant's presentation, I believe by their architect, Alex Clossy. Am I mangling your name, I'm afraid? Okay, close, good. And he'll provide information about his team and the project during his presentation.
Testing. Okay. Hello, my name is Alex Clossy. I'm an architect with Milbrant Architects, and I'm working with Blue Fern's development team on this proposal. I want to thank all of you guys for coming out tonight to hear about our project, and we look forward to kind of giving you a brief overview of it and giving you guys a chance to see what we're proposing and give your input. I want to thank the chair and the development commission for taking the time to hear our proposal as well. And we look forward to working with you guys to develop something that the city and the applicant team are both happy with and proud to move forward with. So the name of the project right now is Towns on 7th, and we're proposing to build for sale townhomes. Holly, if you want to flip to the next slide. I want to take a minute to introduce our team on the applicant side. As I said, I am Alex. I'm with the on the architecture side. Here tonight with us from Blue Fern Development, who is the developer. We also have Michelle Branley and George John. And then with Core Design, who is going to be handling the landscape architecture and the civil engineering, Holly Hebron. And then we have also brought on board Favreau Green Forest, who is a consulting arborist at this point in the process. He's been working with us on the tree preservation of the existing trees on site. And then we have a traffic engineer on board, 10W, and Mike Crimmins. They're not in attendance tonight, but they have been part of the team at this point. And of course, there'll be other consultants that come on board as the project moves forward. So I apologize for some redundant information in relation to the project in site that Holly may have just went over. But just to kind of start at a high level, as Holly had mentioned, the site is located at the intersection of Newport Way and Holly Street, and then also bounded on the eastern side by 7th. And the northern property line kind of jogs along the bounding edge of those parcels and is bounded to the north by some residential neighborhoods, and then also the storage facility that is along Newport Way. Across Holly Street to the south of the site is an elementary school. So as is shown on this slide right here, you can see with the improvements that will be proposed as part of this project, there is a safe walk trail to the elementary school from the development. The project scope consists of 6 parcels, which are listed there on the screen. Those parcels are currently zoned MUR, mixed use residential. The stated intent of that zone within the central Issaquah design standards is to provide low to medium density housing that provides a transition from the more dense urban core to the less dense surrounding neighborhood. So our proposal is seeking to fulfill that requirement by providing some high quality medium density townhomes that blend in with the surrounding context of the single family neighborhood while providing a bit more housing density in the region and in the area. The site square footage is the site area is approximately 1.3 acres. There will be a few dedications to right-of-way as part of the proposal. So the net developable area will fall somewhere just under 1.3 acres once those dedications are made. The maximum density, or the maximum FAR, which is the governing density for the site, is 2.0, and you can see that our proposal falls at 0.93 right now, so we're well under the maximum density allowed on site. Holly, if you want to flip to the next slide, thank you. So just a brief overview of more of the details of the project. Specifically, this image up here on the screen is the current proposed site plan for the project. As Holly had mentioned, it consists of 29 townhome units in what is actually 6 buildings. So I apologize, Holly. I did not catch that in your presentation. And interwoven amongst those buildings will be the through block passage, as was mentioned, and other public community green spaces, as well as the internal drive access for the site, which will provide access to all of the unit garages, which contain all the required parking for the units. And then along the frontages, as has been discussed, there will be the proposed frontage improvements in alignment with the city public works requirements along 7th Avenue, Holly Street, and Newport Way. At the very beginning of this process, we as the applicant team sent a consultant out to observe the site for critical areas. It was determined that there were none on site, and that was in alignment with what the city has mapped for the site as well. There are several existing significant trees on site, so you can see on the site plan here the 2 trees that are a darker green color towards the north of the property are what we are currently proposing to meet the retention requirements. In addition to that, there's several trees on the properties directly to the north of ours that will need to be protected through the process as well. So there's only 2 on our site, but there's quite a few trees that are being protected along that northern property line. If you want to flip to the next one, that would be great. So for the site improvements, as was mentioned, there is an ongoing project within Public Works to implement a roundabout at the intersection of Newport Way and Holly Street. This has been something that our applicant team has been aware of from the very beginning, and we have been working with the planning department and with Public Works to site plan our site in a manner that is congruous with the proposed plans for that. The roundabout right now is still in the design stage, so things are still a little bit fluid. And the roundabout project itself would not be included in the scope of this proposal, but the intent is to design a site that allows for that project to proceed as planned and provide the flexibility in the land dedication for them to be able to complete, for the city to be able to complete that as that project moves forward. The Holly Street, much of the frontage of Holly Street is going to be to some extent tied up with that roundabout improvement as well. Holly, if you could flip back to the previous slide really quick, that would be helpful. So here on this image on the left side of the screen, you can actually see the plans that were provided to us by transportation for the proposed roundabout that we've kind of ghosted in behind our site plan to show, at least at this stage, what the proposal is and how it would relate to the site plan that we currently have. So moving forward, Holly, you can go back to the next slide. Thank you, I appreciate it. Moving forward, that will continue to be an ongoing discussion with the city. It's something that has been talked about through the pre-app process and leading up to this meeting, and what improvements occur along Holly Street and Newport Way are something that we're still trying to understand and seek guidance from on the city in relation to the roundabout project, since that will, at the end of the day, be what comes in and is installed there, but may be lagging behind this proposal. Along 7th Avenue, as was mentioned, there'll be the improvements to the drive lanes, on-street parallel parking provided, as well as the landscape strip and sidewalk. And then there obviously will be utility and infrastructure improvements as is required by the city and Public Works to support this added density and development. And Holly on our team has been taking point and running all of that stuff. So if you have further questions about that, she's happy to give you some more answers there. And then finally, going back to the tree retention, this site plan here, you can see along that northern property line at the top, that highlights both the on-site and off-site trees that are proposed to be retained, as well as just the overall landscape plan showing the various trees and plantings that are intended to meet the canopy percentage for the site. Thank you. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time here to talk more in depth about the through block passage and community spaces on the site in response to the Central Issaquah District standards. The district standards require or encourage us to provide connection between the existing right-of-ways in a block in the form of a through block passage. And so our site plan has sought to provide that as a amenity that would be not just for the residents of the site, but for the public at large. It runs between Newport Way on the western edge and 7th Avenue, or 7th on the eastern side. And in the central location of the site, we're proposed to put a community gathering area, which is schematically represented by that image on the top of the screen, with some barbecues and picnic facilities, a place where residents can come together and interact with each other as well as an open lawn area, just a place to provide gathering and a node along the 3-block passage to enliven that space. In addition, the 3-block passage extends to the north in alignment with the Issaquah district standards for ensuring that front doors of units, the main unit entries, open onto a primary 3-block passage. So the 4 units that are to the north in building 5 on the site plan all front a 3-block passage, which gives them a 20+ foot separation from that property line. Holly, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next one. So this slide here is talking more directly about the vertical architecture, the townhome architecture itself, and that will be in response to the Urban Architecture and Urban Design Manual. That is the guiding basis for our thought process on the design. Holly laid out very succinctly in her slides the requirements for those, and you can see this image that is up here to the left is our proposal for a typical townhome building on site. We are proposing, in alignment with the arts and crafts style, steeply pitched roofs and gable forms with intersecting ridges. You can see some variations in height along the roof line there, and as well, with this being a 3-story townhome building, but some of the units having a havable attic space, a variation along the eave line of the building that helps break up the massing and kind of keep things at more of a human scale. For materials, we're proposing a brick material, which provides a strong base along the bottom of the building, as well as elevating that up to 3 stories in some locations as a focal point along the facade. And then the remainder of the facade would be clad in simulated wood that is painted. For the window treatments, in alignment with the district standards, we're proposing single hung windows in groupings of 1, 2, or 3, simple rectangular forms with just simple trim, or in the case of them being located within the brick facade, highlighted by or more ornate brickwork, full light glass entry doors, and for the color scheme, in line with earth tone colors, whites, grays, dark grays, a dark asphalt shingle roof. Holly, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. So again, I want to thank both the commission and the community residents for taking their time to come out and hear our presentation tonight. Moving forward, we are looking to make the site development permit submittal, SDP submittal, and that is reviewed by city staff. And then there is an amount of back and forth with them to come to agreement on a proposal that satisfies all city regulations. That would go back before this development commission for a public hearing and approval at the end of that process. And then moving forward from there, we'd have the opportunity to submit for our building permits. Thank you again for taking the time to see our proposal. Please let us know if you have any questions. And we look forward to working with the community of Issaquah to provide a high quality project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clossy. So now I'm going to open the floor for public questions and comments. For those making comments, please direct your comments and questions to the applicant. The staff is here to answer any questions you have about the review and permitting process, but I ask that all questions related to the site and design be directed to the applicant and his design team. As a reminder, when it's turn to speak, state your name each time before speaking. Speak clearly and limit your comments to 5 minutes. After a comment or question has been stated, the applicant or someone from the design team will provide a response. Mr. Patch, was anyone signed up for comments on this topic?
Yes, Chair. We have John Falstrom signed up first.
Good evening. My name is John Falstrom, and I live at 885 7th Avenue Northwest. First, let me say that I'm not anti-growth, and I don't want to come across as the old curmudgeon on the block. But I want what happens in my town, and I've lived here since 1965, to make sense. I have several concerns about the proposed towns on 7th development: density, traffic, parking, and the environmental impacts are my major concerns. First, on the issue of density, and mind you, I'll clarify this by saying that this is what I was able to get off the city's website. So if it's in error, I'm open to being corrected. Currently, the property stated for development has 4 single-family residences on it, unoccupied for the most part. Sorry. The proposed project is stated to have 29 multifamily units. That's a 725% increase. The current zoning is mixed-use residential, acknowledged by the proponent, and a density factor, and mixed-use residential, what I was able to determine, 14.52 dwelling units per acre. Using that factor, the maximum number of units should be just under 19 at 18.87. 29 units represent more than a 50% increase in what I was able to determine by the city standards allowable under the current zoning. My next issue is, and do you want me to stop and answer that question or continue on with this? I'll defer to guidance from the commission.
What would you prefer, Mr. Closing? Would you like to respond to those two first?
Sure. So appreciate your questions and your concerns. From a density standpoint, one thing that I did forget to mention is the current existing use of the site. So yes, it is either vacant land or currently single-family homes. As Holly Keaton had mentioned in her presentation, with the site being zoned for the MUR use and being the comprehensive plan designation for that parcel being multifamily use going forward, we believe that the city's intent for those parcels is to bring more density to those sites. And so basically what we have put forward is a proposal that is in alignment with what we believe the city's goals to be, as well as with the current zoning of the site. So there's a couple different ways for density to be measured. It can be units per acre or this FAR mechanism. So FAR is the floor area ratio. And out of the central Issaquah design standards, the FAR is what governs the density on the site in this case. So at a 2.0 FAR, we'd be allowed essentially to build twice whatever the site area is. Our proposal is currently proposing 0.93, so we're falling well below that threshold.
All right, I'll have to review that and see how that provides quite a difference in what's published at 14.5 dwelling units per acre. So my next issue is the added traffic impacts the development will have on 7th Avenue, as that's my frontage. 7th Avenue currently is less than a normal legal street width now, and it's 30 feet. I've measured it several times, with parking allowed on each side. At times, reducing the open traffic flow to essentially one lane at a time. And that's less than, and being generous with car width at saying 7 feet, that's less than the 20 feet required by fire code. And that's the entire street is currently that way. Street was never intended to serve the current traffic volume. And the traffic volume is on file with the city, a study done, I believe, about 3 years ago. I have a copy of that. It's more today by quite a bit. As to parking, the residents on 7th Avenue already see the impact of other nearby developments and businesses. Many times, residents of the Atlas and Vale apartments are forced to park south of Juniper on 7th, as there are no spots available near their buildings. Now, that's not an impact, that's not directly from your project because it isn't there yet. Add to that, we absorb overflow parking from Aegis and occasionally the Juniper Street Professional Building. And in looking at the proposed drawings of the Towns on 7th project, it appears there are only 4 possible spaces on the exterior side of the garages where visitors might be able to park. With 29 units, I think that there's going to be plenty of visitors in there. Where will they park? And I appreciate the acknowledgement of providing for 58 parking spaces underneath the buildings, as that's the reality at today's price point. And I've heard you say that the driveway or the bump out that's shown on the plan that was circulated on 7th Avenue will provide some on-street parallel parking. And I don't think that's going to be adequate, but, and then the other parking issue is the city, and I guess, well, I'm almost done. The city's going to need to acknowledge how construction traffic is managed during this project, because there's no, unless the school district agrees to absorb the project, that's, anyway. Regarding the pedestrian traffic and the improvements that you do, they're great. They are a road to nowhere on 7th Avenue. There is no transition from that project to the major sidewalk improvements north of Juniper on 7th, other than through my front yard. And so I'd like to have some discussion with somebody in the planning department at some time to try to figure out how that's going to work, because it's going to create a very large number of pedestrian walkways going to Safeway and the other stores, and they're just going to be on the street, which is a safety issue. I've got other things, but that sums it up for now. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to bring this forward.
Thanks. Mr. Clausy, did you have any response to the rest of that input?
Sure. So again, thank you. These are all great points and concerns to raise, particularly for all of you who live in the area who are going to see the most direct impacts of this. I'll try and kind of go through one by one. In relation to the streets and parking and pedestrian to some extent, as was mentioned, the 7th Avenue is currently unclassified in the transportation plan. But that's part of the whole development process, is to work out a classification for that street. In relation to the street width itself, we would be providing 20 feet of pavement, 2 10-foot travel lanes on each side, and then the parking would be outside of that. So the street, and that's all really dictated by Public Works and city standards. So they have put much time and resource into developing their transportation plan, and as part of our project we would be required to make those improvements on our side of the site and in front of our site. To your point about what happens further down the street, that would fall outside of the scope of this project and would be something that's more on a planning or transportation basis with the city in terms of what their long-term goals are for that street. In relation to parking, I will admit that this is always a concern that comes up amongst the community. Cars are big, they take up a lot of room. We have made a concerted effort to provide 2 stalls for every unit in a garage. The zoning allows for less than that, but we as the development team, both from a market value and just from a practicality standpoint, really feel that families still are going to have 2 cars and they're going to need a place to park those cars. In addition, you mentioned we do have some open stalls on the site as well to provide for guest parking. That's not necessarily a requirement by the zoning code, but it is something that we've tried to provide as both an amenity and to try and keep cars off the street as much as possible.
Thanks. Do we have another speaker signed up to speak?
Yes, Chair, we have John Traeger signed up next.
Good evening. My name's John Traeger. I live at 710 7th Avenue Northwest, which is directly across the street from the proposed project. I am also a current board member of the Bridgewater Place Condominium Homeowners Association. Bridgewater's Place is all the duplexes across the street. I've also served on the Issaquah Development Commission and have reviewed the documents, and I have some comments here that have also been reviewed with the other board members. The first area is the building site design. The massing, scale, materials, and colors all seem in context with the neighborhood and the Central Issaquah general zoning or style, so we appreciate that. The lighting consideration needs to be sensitive to the second floor bedrooms and the condo streets across the street. So those bedrooms face out, and if they have bright lights shining in, it'd probably make it kind of hard to sleep for folks. Traffic movement, the speeds on 7th Avenue Northwest have been high for years, despite community members complaining to the City Council and Public Works. We've been asking for a speed hump or some means to bring the speeds down. When they did a speed measurement there, they were hitting like 50 miles an hour, because on the west side of the street, there's no curb gutter sidewalk. People generally don't park there. There's more of a ditch. So the street looks physically wide, and people just hit the metal and go fast down the street. And part of it is the success of the apartment buildings that were built further up on 7th, and the success of the Safeway complex in town center over there. A lot of traffic heading southbound onto Newport tends to come all the way down and then turn on Holly Street. So something you want to consider is how that will work with the two roundabouts, because people will want to do two roundabouts. They'll want to go all the way down to Holly, take one roundabout to get on Newport to go south, because that seems to be where most of the flow goes that we see coming every day. And so we'd like to have the curb gutter and sidewalk, if possible, the entire length of the street, to try to narrow it and slow it down. So if you look at the block north there on 7th, north of Juniper, they actually travel slower because it's a very narrow street with parking on both sides. And so we'd like to have something similar. If we can't get a speed hump, at least something that has the same effect on the speeds of the traffic. Because all the houses on our side back out onto that street, so it's already interesting enough. And one last consideration there in traffic movement is with a single driveway in and out of the proposed project, it's directly across from my driveway. So I'm backing out and having cars turning motion and then cars coming down the street. It's going to be interesting. So I don't know if that one driveway is going to work perfectly well or safely. So something to consider there. Also, there's no utility plan, obviously, because it's a little bit early, but a consideration, so there's an existing pole on the east side of 7th Avenue Northwest that services the current buildings on the property. And it also services a couple of our units because it came down the street to a pole, then it got undergrounded from that location. So we'd like to see that all of it get undergrounded correctly. When you have to bring in undergrounding for your utilities, that you would include ours and get rid of that pole altogether, bring it all underground like it should have been done originally. And another question in that area is, will there be gas lines, or is this going to be an all-electric facility? And then another related question is, what is the power service? Will there be sufficient power for electric car charging in these units? Construction plans. What is the construction vehicle flow plan? There's a school across Holly that has significant bus and car traffic during the school year in the mornings and afternoons. And there's insufficient space on Northeast 7th for a truck turning radius into the job site. So we propose that large vehicles such as dump trucks, flatbeds, and concrete trucks enter and exit from Newport Way on maybe a temporary work driveway. Because it gets really busy there during those times of day. Also related to construction is, where will the employees park? So there's very limited parking, as you already heard. So we propose that you secure off-site parking for your construction staff. Thank you.
Thank you. This is on, right? Sorry if I've been blasting all your eardrums. I didn't realize we could stand back here and it'll all be good. Again, thank you for your comment. In relation to the frontage improvements along 7th, as I kind of touched on earlier, the applicant team's responsibility is the portion that's in front of their site, and we would redevelop that in alignment with Issaquah's plans for that street. The access point itself to the site for the drive aisle, the internal drive aisle, there's a couple constraints upon where that can go, one being that 7th is the lowest classification of right-of-way frontage that we have, so generally that's where the access points to the site are encouraged to be placed. And then also we want to keep that removed from the intersection to the greatest extent possible, just for safety from turning and kind of conflicts around the intersection. So that was an intentional choice on our end to locate it there based on some of the, the practical safety concerns, as well as separation requirements and things of that nature that Public Works has. In relation to the construction and kind of the plan for managing all of that, Issaquah or any jurisdiction will have in place requirements, and that's part of the permitting process in terms of demonstrating how the plan for going about construction will be handled, and obviously impacts on surrounding right-of-ways need to be coordinated as part of that process in terms of when things can be ripped up and when things can be shut down to make those improvements to the site and things of that nature. So all of that is governed in a process and reviewed by the city and developed in tandem with the city to hopefully take into account, the surrounding community and the impacts that it has on everyone. I believe you had a question in there about whether there'd be gas coming on the site, and then also the electric. Holly can confirm, but I don't believe we're proposing any gas for this site at this time. Yeah. And then in terms of the electric utilities, again, that would be developed in accordance with and with guidance from Public Works in terms of what they're looking to see in those frontage improvements. Our understanding at this time is that the power would be underground along that frontage for the entirety as part of the improvements there. And then I believe you also had a question about the EV charging. So that's, again, also part of Issaquah's code, and they have a requirement, and it's actually now been adopted and as part of the state code for any type of residential development that you have to provide a certain percentage of electric vehicle charging stations as part of the development. I believe, does that cover most everything that you had? Lighting. Oh, and that was just site lighting and kind of the impacts upon the site. So for external lighting on the site, there will be a lighting plan developed, and that will be with industry best standards in terms of what is currently acceptable, lots of downlighting, trying to minimize impacts off the site and on the environment. And then in terms of lights internal to the residences, these units would all be provided with blinds or other devices for the residents' own use as well, to help mitigate lighting impacts outside of the unit.
Thanks. Next speaker on the list, please.
Yes, Chair, we have James.
How is everybody doing tonight? Thanks for being here. My name is James Carr. I'm the neighbor to where you guys are going to be, the Universal Energy Martial Arts School. First off, you guys are going to take my view, and it is what it is. But it's going to be a nice view for whoever gets that corner lot there. My big one is, so I mow the grass a lot right where my sign is, and there's about a 4-foot drop. So you guys, when they start doing the Newport Way and expanding that out, that's going to have to flow out. Are you guys going to have significant drainage? Because that whole area, the backside, the whole thing on that property is underwater at least a month out of the year. So there's got to be some serious drainage put into that place, because I don't want it to come onto mine and flood me out, because as soon as that lifts up, you guys are going to have to raise up, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yeah, so for drainage, Holly has ran point on all of this, but this soils on the site are not going to allow for any sort of infiltration. So we're proposing a vault on site that would handle all the on-site stormwater, and then I believe additional facilities that would handle the right-of-way improvements or things that are off of our site. And so that would all be, that's all to the stormwater manual, which is all, very specifically laid out in terms of the requirements of that. So that's how all of the on-site runoff and that would all be treated on-site internally before it's dispersed.
Sweet. When you guys are building, there's tons of kids that are my place, plus also during the school year, there's tons of kids that are walking in and out. Are you guys going to fence that around while you're doing building?
Yeah, so it would be a typical construction plan, management plan with
Sweet.
fencing and kind of what I had touched upon earlier. That all is developed throughout the permitting process to make sure that all of those scenarios are, forethought and addressed ahead of time to try and minimize impacts.
How about afterwards? Will it be fenced around, or will it be wide open?
So the frontages, all of the frontages would be open.
How about the
and
connecting lots, like to the neighbors, to
to the north?
Yeah,
the north property.
And
Yeah,
mine,
so
basically, all that stuff.
we would propose a form of privacy fencing along
Nice.
the shared property lines. The street frontages themselves,
Right.
kind of in alignment with.
Yeah, I was
the
just mainly
state-
talking about that middle part
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Okay, cool. And so you're just going to have one in ingress on the 7th?
Correct.
So not a Newport, okay. And I can't remember. She's going to take the rest.
Effects
Go
of
say who you are,
visibility.
who you are.
Hi, my name is Amy Carr, and also I have a fitness studio right next door to the proposed site, Towns on 7th. And specifically, the effects of visibility for our business. I know that they're going to be taking a portion of our business once they do roundabouts and expand that road. But as far as the design, our business is nestled kind of in between the storage unit place as well as 7th. So we've got two very large buildings on the side of us, and then we're kind of just stuck in between. So as far as visibility for us, we're not sure how that's going to look for people to be able to see and know that that's where our studio is, as far as entrance. As far as the reality of the traffic on Newport Way, I know a lot of people discuss 7th, and Newport Way is has very high traffic, and specifically during certain times of the day. And I know that John had mentioned the limit and the capacity of only being able to put so many units on that, and I know that you guys have also talked about that. But adding even more traffic to the area when it's already congested is going to cause, serious issues for neighbors and for safety as far as for the community. And so will there be traffic control provided during the project?
Yeah, so something that I should have mentioned earlier, on that first slide with our team, we do have the traffic engineer that's on board, and he kind of does the scoping analysis of the site and what the impacts of that are going to be, and then they would offer recommendations for how to try and mitigate those effects in the surrounding areas, and that expands out from the site to a certain extent, not just directly adjacent to the site, in terms of how that's going to be managed. And then the street improvements themselves, Newport being a very busy street, Issaquah is already working on a future plan to help manage that, with the roundabout being part of that, to try and address the vehicle volume along Newport Way.
Right, thank you. And as far as hauling in and out soil, that's all gonna come from 7th, and that's not gonna be coming from Newport, as you had said. So when they're developing the site, the main entrance is gonna be on the other side, on 7th Avenue. That's where you're gonna be coming in and out of as
So-
far as the development.
Yeah, the final, like the actual vehicular entrance to the site will be off of 7th. We have, at this stage, not gotten to the point of developing like a construction plan.
I see.
And that would be in consultation with city staff as well in terms of what works best for them. We do have 3 frontages on the site, so we do have a lot of options, which is somewhat unique to the site as opposed to a site that's bounded by neighboring parcels on all sides and you just have your one right-of-way frontage. So we do have some flexibility there, but at this time we haven't developed a plan for how the construction build-out would be
Okay.
addressed and how that would be phased.
And then as far as the time frame of the build-out, is there,
So as we kind of went over at the end there, and as Holly Keaton had mentioned, the process would be to make this application for the site development permit, and that SEPA will be included in that. There's a variety of reviews and back and forth with the city in terms of responding to their recommendations and comments. And the timeline on that could be 2 to 3 months. It's hard to say. The review times are hit and miss, just broadly across the region right now. There's a lot of work going on. So once we kind of get through that process, we would look to get recommended for approval and come back before the Development Commission. And then with their approval, the permit for doing the site work and for the buildings themselves could be applied for. And from there, there'd be another round of review. So all told, in terms of when the shovel actually hits the dirt, that's still months and months, 12 to 18 months out.
okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So it's going to be compacted back, and you guys are up on the road, and once it gets expanded, it's going to be even harder to see us.
Are you talking about for the school sign?
After that,
So I don't know.
right now, I got a sign right up there, but they're going to take that down.
Right, and that's part of that whole roundabout plan, is that, yeah. So, that's one of, as we kind of tried to state in the application, that whole roundabout scenario is a little bit in flux and amorphous right now, because they're still working through the design of it. So what that finally looks like and kind of where it falls in relation to your property would be hard to say, but for your sign, you'd still have the frontage there, so I would hope that you'd find a good place to put. And with the right-of-way width between our project and yours, there should still be decent visibility as you come around the corner there.
Thank you, and I just remind our speakers that your comments must be made at the lectern or the microphone's not going to pick up on the recording or otherwise, so thank you. And if we could be mindful of the 5-minute limit, of course. Who is next to speak?
Yes, Chair, we have Charles signed up. Okay, then we have Linda signed up. No. Okay. Then we have Amy Quinn.
Hi, I'm Amy Quinn, live at 708 7th Avenue across the street from the project. Just a couple of questions in relationship to the elementary school right across the street on Holly. There are a number of families that walk their kids back and forth to school. And with integrating the traffic circle at Holly and Newport, knowing full well that coming out of a traffic circle, it's a horrible place to walk. How, that needs to be addressed and looked at for families and, 8, 9, 10-year-olds walking back and forth to school by themselves. And then along with families, the public space within your complex, will that have facilities for young families? The school is not really available, the playground area is not available during school days, and then after-school programming, it continues to be locked. It's not really available to the public on a very regular basis. So being that it's a townhome complex with a couple of bedrooms and 2-car garages and things like that, there's going to be families that move into there, and that recreation needs to be provided for those young, a tot lot, whatever you would call. That would be probably an important amenity. And then would that amenity be available to the neighborhood in that aspect? So I would concur with John that developing part of the block with sidewalk and parking is not a great alternative, and that it really does need to be finished all the way up to Juniper. So the city should probably be looking into that along with that project, because to just end it, as John said, it's a good stretch for people to go from lovely sidewalk with bike routes to what it is now. So those are my comments.
Again, thank you for your comments. In relation to the crossing at the roundabout, most of that would be driven by the city's design plans for that roundabout. That would all be factored into the design that they come up with that. So providing a form of safe crossing, and that would obviously tie in with the improvements that we do along the frontage of our site and corresponding to that. But where that crossing may fall is going to come from the plans for that roundabout. And for the on-site amenity space that we provided, so because of the size of the development and the number of units that we have, it actually triggers a mechanism in the code to provide an additional 400 feet of amenity area, which is largely what we're trying to show in that center portion. What we showed there was kind of a schematic look at something that could be proposed there. What the final arrangement of that may be will be determined as we go through the review process, whether that's a play structure or more open field, more kind of ambiguous space for a variety of activities, or something more concrete like a play structure. That would be determined as we go through the review process. Was that everything? Sorry, I'm trying to remember.
The last one was the just the sidewalk, and that was
Yeah.
mostly directed towards the commission.
Yeah, so again,
City.
that kind of
Is
goes back to the development standards for that street. Yeah.
Next person signed up to speak.
We have no more in-person signed up.
Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak in the room who did not sign up before? Okay, please come to the lectern and speak your name and proceed.
Yes, I'm Jerry Bernstein. I also live in Bridgewater Place, and I just have a few simple questions. I was curious as to what the setback would be for the edge of the building to the sidewalk on 7th Avenue. And I'm curious as to, in some places in your presentation, you talked about 3 stories of the townhomes being 3 stories, but the concept was showing like 4 stories. So, and then I'm also curious as to along 7th Avenue, how compatible it would be to the Bridgewater Place across the street. So those are my questions.
Okay, appreciate the questions. So in regards to the setbacks, in alignment with the standards for this central Issaquah district, they encourage the creation of a street wall along those frontages. So they're encouraging you to pull the buildings forward to maintain a sense of street edge along the edge of the right-of-way there. So the setback could be anywhere from 0 to 10 feet in those instances. What we are proposing on our site plan along our 3 frontages ranges anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 feet setback from the back of sidewalk from the edge of the property line, and then where the sidewalk falls in relation to that would be kind of up to what the final plans for the frontage improvements are.
So we'll see them in the site plan, more or less, that we could
The-
comment then, because I was thinking it would just be more compatible to have a wider setback with the property across the street, you know, closer to the 10 feet.
Yeah. No, and we
So
appreciate
that's
that feedback.
a comment.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, basically what we're trying to do there is fulfill the requirements that the city has in their design standards for developing that street edge. Obviously, those buildings are broken up in the way that they're positioned along those frontages, so we don't, you know, there's gaps between the buildings. It's not just a continuous building face, and that allows for the ability to provide that through-walk passage, to provide some of the little like pocket park landscape areas between the buildings as well. But there are certain zoning requirements that we have to be in compliance with in relation to the setbacks along the frontages specifically. And then in relation to the building height or the number of stories, so the concept for the townhomes is that they would be 3-story units, but with the steeply pitched roof, we would want to take that area that's inside the actual roof, like underneath the roof surface, that what would be an attic, and make that a habitable space, which is an amenity to the residents, giving them additional space, and then also allowing us to do those dormers along the front facade. And so that's where you get some of the variation, where it's 4 stories and then down to 3 stories. And again, with the working within the architectural and urban design manual, that's trying to provide some of the architectural articulation that they're looking for along those street faces with the varying heights in the dormer and gable roof forms.
Okay, so when would we be able to see what the architect you have designed
Proposed.
along 7th Avenue?
Sure. So as part of this SCP submittal for the site development permit, a big chunk of that is going to be from Holly's team on the civil side and the landscape side, and that's all kind of the site-related stuff. That is, you know, the horizontal layout of the site. But as part of that as well, there's the design review aspect, and so we will be submitting a full set of rendered elevations as well as example building plans, and those would all be available as part of that submittal.
Okay, all right. No, I don't believe I have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to speak on the topic? Hearing none, Mr. Patrick, do we have anyone online who's signed up to speak?
Giving them 1 minute.
Okay.
Yes, I see one raised hand. Connie, I'm going to unmute you and make you a panelist now.
All right, okay. So I am joining in from San Francisco here because I just can't stay away from you all. I'm Connie Marsh, I live up on Squawk. So I'm going to shotgun my comments, and I'm going to start with being in the MUR, the M-U-R district, which I looked at the zoning map, not really central Issaquah. I agree with the 4.52 units, so I'm not really understanding where you're coming up with the concept that you are fulfilling the vision when you aren't really in the central Issaquah plan from what I can see. So I'm not sure that the design manual actually works. So at least I don't think you have to do the things in the design manual. So I suspect the city is saying something to you that I'm not sure the rest of the community agrees with, but there you have that. Now, I'm going to move back to transportation because that's a hot topic. So in your SEPA study of transportation, I think you're also going to be having to look at the impacts to Juniper, because you are in sort of a going around the block scenario where people can enter in a variety of places and exit in a variety of places. So I think your impacts to Juniper are also going to be considerable. The fronting on Newport in the future of a roundabout, I'm not sure about what the city development standards will be with fronting development on the backside of a roundabout. Also on Holly, I see that you would end up with extra right-of-way. Now granted, the sketch that you put in, I was strongly told by the city that that is not the current sketch, and so we don't really know what's going to happen. But we do know that the land all around you is going to change. So I would like to understand how you are going to change your development to fit in with a future land change. That seems very difficult. But I would like a description of how you imagine that is beyond just, well, we'll do what they say and we'll figure it out. So what will you do with extra land? What will you do if you end up with your back to a roundabout? And how will you make this place habitable? So is the through block passage public? You didn't answer the question that was addressed by someone else. So are the people going to be able to use this space? And then are there going to be interim traffic improvements before that you have to hook into a roundabout? And what are the temporary traffic improvements that you are going to have for ingress and egress as you develop? So then I read your geotech report, which included seismic hazard area, which is a critical area, erosion hazard, which is a critical area, and an incredibly shallow groundwater level, where James also said that there is ponding. So I suspect you actually do have a wetland and wetland buffer. So I do disagree with the concept that you don't have critical areas on your site. Now your wet dirt and your incredibly fine soils will not support structure. So this means you're going to have a large amount of dirt moving, which is going to have significant transportation impacts on the neighborhood, and also on how you're going to be having to handle water on your site. So I would be interested to understand Baker tanks, where are they going? How's it going to handle with the community? And then one other suggestion with developments that have been tight like this is they've created email lists for all of the adjacent neighbors so that they could keep them in the plan as the development continues, so they have some idea of what's going to happen week to week. And they've popped out these emails every week to make people happy around them, and they've had signage with numbers on them that people can call night or day if they're having issues. One other thing is it seems like you're going to have difficult soil work in the wet season anyway, because of your soils just love water and become more unstable, and you have a school across the way. So if I were the city, I would require that you do your earth moving and most of your exterior grading in the summer season to keep it out of the school and the stability issues with wet soils. So I think I hope that was within 5 minutes, but I have fulfilled my list. Thank you.
Thank you again for taking the time to join us virtually. I'll try and kind of run through, feel free to chime in, because there's quite a few items in there and I want to make sure that I take the time to address them. Starting with the roundabout and the frontage improvements and the way that the site is responding to that. So as part of the proposal from the pre-app process forward, or from in development of the plans for the pre-app, we were in contact with the city, and that's where we were made knowledgeable of the proposed roundabout project and have been working in tandem with city staff to the best of our ability with the plans that they've provided us to respond to that. So the site plan on the southwestern corner of our 6 parcels is dedicating an area of land, kind of a triangular trapezoidal area that would go towards creating that roundabout. And that's why on the site plan you'll see the arrangement of buildings kind of responding to that change in the property lines there to accommodate that future installation. As for the area that is to the south of the site, that in the proposed roundabout plans, kind of the roundabout swoops out there, and so I think that's what you're referencing in relation to the additional site area. That area in and of itself would not be going to our development. It would not be part of our proposal, at least at this stage. So that would be, developed in accordance with the plans that the city has for that area that is newly being created. To your question about what the interim improvements would be, that is a question that our applicant team is still trying to understand as well, given that the proposal for the roundabout and those frontages is still under design and somewhat in flux. And that's something that we look to address with city staff moving forward in terms of what they would like us to install in the interim, assuming that our project runs in front of what those final improvements would be. So I guess, stay tuned for what the final proposal for those interim improvements would be.
So I'm going to comment just for a second here. You realize we've been working on that design for 30 years. So don't hold your breath on that one. In the interim, you're going to design to the straight road.
That is what we have shown on the current proposal, and that is basically the point that we had arrived at in needing to prep the materials for this meeting. Again, what the final resolution of what interim improvements may be put in is something that we hope to work through in the permitting process here.
So then putting the fronts of the buildings up onto Newport Way, because those are the fronts of the buildings, correct?
Correct.
What happens to that if it does turn into a roundabout?
So those buildings would still be fronting that public right-of-way there, and as part of the roundabout improvements, the concept would be that there would be, public sidewalk that is included with those improvements, and so those buildings along that frontage would be creating, a street presence and have their front entries facing the public realm in those areas.
Okay, thanks. We're going to need to move on now to our next commenter. Do we have someone else online signed up to speak?
No, Chair, I don't see anybody else online signed up to speak.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for your comments tonight and for your input and starting this dialogue. I think you've driven out a lot of points that weren't obvious from the beginning. So now we're going to turn it over to the Development Commission and open the floor to commissioners. Does anyone have a question or comment for the applicant?
Mr. Chair, just a comment on the building design. I know you've heard a lot about the site and transportation impacts, and we'll come back to those. So can you talk a little bit more about how these buildings will interface in the kind of the pedestrian space and the entries? Are there going to be covers over the entries? Will there be extending out partially over the sidewalk, provide some pedestrian protection? A little bit more about what your thinking is about how these will interface in the pedestrian environment.
Sure. So in relation to the pedestrian entries for the units, they all either front along their existing right-of-way frontages or along that interior through block passage that's through the site, so the public realm in both senses. And the plan for what that entry will look like, we've provided. There aren't plans in this presentation, but there would be essentially an entry porch or stoop that would be covered, and that's kind of integral to the building architecture, which you could see a little bit in elevation, and then just landscaping and other kind of yard and facade treatments to try and soften that street edge and make it at a human scale and something that's enjoyable for passerby walking by, and also for you coming home to your front entry of your unit.
Right. And then as far as you've got to balance that with privacy and security for the residents as well. So It'll be interesting to see a little bit more about, how that interface looks when you come back for the public hearing.
Sure.
A question about the through block connection. So it is a public space. I mean, it's open
Correct.
to the public. That's the point, to give people with the larger blocks an opportunity to kind of shorten their trip with a through block connection. Can you talk a little bit about how that will interface at Newport and at 7th? How it will be inviting for people to actually come, be welcome into that space instead of feeling like it's private? Because the idea is it would be a public amenity.
Sure. First off, I'll lead off by saying that all of the details in terms of how that will be worked out haven't been worked out at this point in the design process. But from a conceptual standpoint, along 7th and along Newport, the idea would be to treat that as somewhat of a courtyard space. So it's on 7th Avenue, it would be framed by buildings on both sides of that. And so if you can imagine having units with their front entries that are fronting onto that space, it has a 10-foot sidewalk going through the middle of it, and trying to create an inviting space that feels like kind of a portal to the site or an entry point to the site from the pedestrian realm. And then on the Newport side, this site geometry gets a little tight there with the roundabout improvement. So there's actually an opportunity to do something at that frontage that maybe is more public in nature and a little bit more inviting, because we have a decent amount of room and kind of this triangular shaped parcel to do something with vegetation and trellising or arbors or something that creates, again, another kind of an entryway to the site there.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Morgan?
Thank you, Chair. Do you want questions and comments at the same time? Or just
Yes,
questions?
this is our opportunity.
Do it all.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming in the presentation. And thank you to all the public, obviously, for being here tonight, coming out to express your opinions, and especially ex-Commissioner Traeger. It's nice to see you again. So, Holly, would it be possible to pull up the site design, the site plan? And maybe while she's doing that, I can ask you one question about the, I should point out at the beginning, I do appreciate how the efforts you've made to meet the arts and crafts style, because these are all kind of new styles from the central area plan, and so going through it, I appreciate a lot of things you've done with that. One of the questions I had mentions in, I think, your narrative, that there's a minimum of 8/12 pitch, the primary is 10/12, and it looks like most of the rooms I could see were 10/12. And I think the arts and crafts requires all the pitches to be the same. So I wondered where the 8/12 was. Is that just canopies or something like that that you wouldn't notice? Or?
A couple places where that might show up is over those low roofs, but that could be something that is worked with and adjusted to get to 10/12. And then it wasn't in the images that were presented, but you would see it in the full application packet for the design review. On the rear side of the units, we do have a couple modulated bays in some of the buildings, in which we've gone kind of with a shed that springs from the same point coming down, but that would be at a lower roof slope, obviously, to define that element coming down. That was something that we were proposing in the design. It was in alignment with a couple of the images that were included in the imagery for arts and crafts within the manual. Mm-hmm. Whether that strictly complies with the requirements, we're certainly open to feedback on. But that was, those were the areas where we wouldn't be having the 10/12 pitch.
Okay. But the vast majority of the 10/12 appearance-wise.
Yeah, so that elevation that was up on screen is broadly representative of the look that we're going for, with an overall gable front to back, and then using those dormer features to provide interest and break up the facade.
Okay, thank you. And it looked to me that in what is shown there, I'm trying to remember if this is the street facing or interior facing.
this would be a street facing.
Street
facade.
facing, yeah. And I thought on some of one of the other plans that showed an arched entry over a door, I think one of the facets that was listed for arts and crafts were arched entries. It looked like these doors might be a rectangular door. Would that be something that would, and given the design has a lot of very, rectangular, geometric, straight lines, would it be possible to look at more arched entryways for these doors as partly way to differentiate them and meet that, not a specific requirement, but one of the things they look for?
Yeah, so the entries, as you said, that we were proposing is kind of a rectilinear opening that we would be highlighting with some ornate brickwork around it, either turning the course of the brick or providing a headstone, some combination of that. But as you noted in the design requirements, it does speak somewhat to using the arched form. So that could certainly be something that's investigated as part of the process as well.
Great, thank you. It also, and this might be for staff, it mentioned in the staff report roof heights of 40 or 35 to 45 or 40 to 45. It looked like in the staff report, the limit was 40. There was a mention of 45-foot heights, but I wasn't sure where that would have been, if that's a...
So this is actually a good question that we had discussed as the applicant team. By the reading of the code, we understand the building height by its code definition to be measured to the midpoint of the roof. But when we were asked to provide the numbers for that staff report, they were asking for the peak. So that was actually a concern or a potential question that we were, looking to come up at this meeting, in that the numbers, if we're measuring to the peak that we provided, look like they're out of compliance. But if we're defining building height by the definition that's in the code, that number would be lower because it's at the midpoint of that gable. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, it definitely does. Sounds like that's something you'd work out and probably before you have the SDP.
Yeah, I mean,
together, yeah.
what we would show in the submittal for SDP would be compliance with the building height regulation and demonstrating that height dimension based on the midpoint of the roof.
Excellent, thank you. And one thing that it looked like the images we were shown were for building 5, an interior building. I guess my largest concern appearance-wise might be the east side of building 1 facing 7th Avenue, which is a 105-foot long building. And I think there are 2 unit entrances there, but then a fairly long blank wall, and we don't know what that building looks like there. And then I think the building 4 facing 7th is also the side of a building. So I guess design-wise, one of my concerns will be, what does it look like along 7th Avenue, especially for the neighbors across the street, but for anybody going down there, especially that long, 100-foot long building facade, how's that going to fit in, and what you could do there. So don't have to answer with what you would do tonight, but I think that would be a concern.
Yeah, and apologies for not having images that show that. But much in the same manner of this elevation here, that facade along 7th would be, it does have the front unit entries. And then you mentioned building 5, which has or building 4, which has the side elevation. What we've done there, which again, I can't show you a visual of, but is take the unit entry and put it on the corner of the building to try and make that a visual centerpiece to that elevation, since it is a side elevation. And then also things like that you can see on here, we have the balconies up the upper levels, same type of materiality with the brick, and that going more than just 1 story above grade. And then again, the varying roof line. So that would all be in the packet that we submit, and I apologize for not having an image of it, but that sense would be along those street frontages.
Great,
as well.
so that same brick base, you think? And
Yeah.
Great, excellent, thank you. And then the roundabout design is an interesting question, having just driven through the redone roundabout on East Lake Splendors Parkway. and wondering, hopefully the city comes up with a long-term roundabout design that they don't have to rebuild for you. And then I think to me, it is strange for the city to require to build a sidewalk that essentially ends at somebody's driveway, right in the middle of somebody's driveway. But I can understand long-term, and I guess it would be nice to know either that the city has plans to fully improve that sidewalk all the way down, or make it a more narrow street with parking just on one side, instead of just having yours sitting there for perhaps a long time without it. So that's, I guess, a comment for the city. Be nice to know when that's going to be done, how it's going to be done, and all that. So, and again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shore?
Hello. I want to say we had great public comments tonight. You all covered many of my comments and questions. I do have a few follow-up items. Will there be a crosswalk across 7th or Holly, away from the roundabout? We kind of talked about pedestrians at the roundabout, but at the other corner?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think a lot of that will be generated by the traffic scoping that we do for the project and recommendations that they have in relation to that for how that intersection is handled at the corner of 7th and Holly. As of right now, that hasn't been addressed in the proposal. And then, again, I hate to keep going back to this roundabout, but you know, that actually encroaches pretty far in the proposed state of what we know of it now, encroaches pretty far towards that intersection of 7th and Holly. So depending on what the plan is for where a crosswalk, whether that's more towards the circle or more towards where it starts to neck down again, that could start to play into how that intersection is handled, I think.
Okay. I noticed there was a wall detail included in the packet, and maybe I missed the location, but where are you anticipating walls?
So that mine of Holly doesn't have slides up anymore. I think that was probably on the landscape slide there with the community space area. And I think that would just be kind of like a landscape feature, something to delineate space, maybe provide a low seat wall for pedestrians to stop and sit on as they're moving through the site or through the space.
Oh, it was more of a fill wall with a drainage detail behind it, but you're not anticipating any walls, like retaining walls?
In terms of site retaining walls?
Yeah.
No, not at this time.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all my comments.
Okay. Any other questions from commissioners? Thanks. I have just a few and a comment. First, I was curious, why was the overall goal for townhomes reduced from 30 to 29? There was a reference, I think, in the project narrative that you were going to build 30.
Yeah, so at the pre-app stage, I believe we were showing a concept that had 32 townhomes on it, and that has been revised to help better accommodate the thought process behind and the intent behind the through-block passage through the site, as well as responding to the feedback that we received at the pre-app in terms of what that should look like. What we had proposed at the pre-app was a potential deviation from the standards of the through-block passage, because we had a set of units located on the site that created a pinch point just based on the site geometries. So to better provide the standard of what the through-block passage should be, we took some of those units away to better develop that concept and provide the through-block passage through the site. That was the primary driving factor. There was a couple other, there was some drainage and vault location that also factored into that, as well as the tree retention up at the north of the site.
Okay, that leads to another question I had on through-block. I believe on page 40 it says the site design includes 2 primary and 1 secondary pedestrian-only through-block passage. Is there a secondary passage there that I'm not seeing on the design?
No, there's not. That's an oversight from, again, that pre-app site plan.
Right,
Yep.
okay, thanks. Getting to the arts and crafts style, I'm not an expert on this, but we may have some comments from the architects on the commission later on. So I had some questions. I wonder if the darker masonry that's shown in the packet there is appropriate that high in the building for arts and crafts style. You might take a check on that in the Architecture and Urban Design Manual.
Okay.
I think the horizontal windows on the first level are not really a typical arts and crafts effect. And together with that, I think multiple smaller window panes is more typical of arts and crafts than I'm really seeing on the design there. So you might take a look at those. And I think it would be helpful, obviously, to see colors of materials, especially with a materials packet later on in the process, so we can get a little clearer idea what those are. Tonight, I'm seeing a little bit more detail than we did on the original packet of
Right.
the colors of those materials.
Yeah, we actually, over here on the side, we brought a couple material boards for those two schemes. We can set them out, and you guys are free to, walk by and take a look at them.
Okay.
And I guess a couple of questions back to you in relation. So for the window panes, are you referencing the actual window sizes themselves, or like the grids within
The panes within the windows, the grids
Okay.
within
Yeah,
the windows.
the window grids.
I think you tend to see a lot of detail in arts and crafts design within those windows. Understand this is a more contemporary takeoff in arts and crafts, so
Right.
but you just might look at what you can do within
Sure.
that.
Yep. No, that makes sense.
That criterion. And then finally, just a comment, I appreciate your cognizance of the city's sustainability goals and some of the steps and practices you highlighted that you were looking at possibly taking: solar-ready roofs, Energy Star appliances, heat pumps, water sense fixtures, and minimizing the need for permanent irrigation. So I think that's a plus. Any other comments from the Development Commission tonight? Commissioner Brennan.
Yeah, just since I didn't add a comment at the end of my questions. We did hear a lot from the public tonight, and really appreciate people spending time with us and giving us your input. But a lot around pedestrian safety and traffic impacts. And if you think about the redevelopment that's happening in this area now, the multifamily projects to the north, along with the shopping center up there, definitely can see how we're experiencing more congestion, concern about pedestrian safety. So I'll be interested when this comes back to understand a little bit more about how that's being addressed kind of on the ground. And I know, like you've talked in your responses about the roundabout not being, still in kind of amorphous stage, some work yet to be done there. But just how pedestrians will access the site and how, if there's needed traffic calming, the city may be able to provide us some information about the plans specifically for 7th, but just in this particular vicinity, because we are seeing, as planned, higher density in development, and with that comes the need to ensure we're being attentive to the capacity needs and the safety needs of the people that live and work through there or travel through there. So just a comment. Hopefully we can have a little bit more detail when it comes back on that.
Sure. Any other comments from the commission tonight? Okay, thank you. Development Commission comments are closed for this evening. I'd like to move on to reports. I'd like to ask staff to provide any updates on city council meetings or activities.
Good evening, commissioners and members of the community. Really good feedback on this project. We do want to take a minute to thank you all for your participation in the Title 18 update, and that process has been going along. But before we do that, we want to announce that we are fully staffed now. We've completed our team with a planning manager position, and Christian Guys is here, if you don't mind turning on your camera and saying hi to the commissioners. He will be your staff liaison. And he comes to us from City of Kirkland, where he's worked for the last 15 years. He started as a planner and was a planning supervisor there. So Christian, take it away, and thanks for joining and listening in to your first meeting. It's his day 2 working for the city.
Yeah, very, very glad to be here. Very, very excited. Such an interesting and dynamic way to involve the public from the the beginning of a project. So I really appreciate that, and this will be a lot of fun to get my feet wet in some new process and code, and hope I can help out with the staff and developers and the public. So.
Great, thank you. And we'll send you an email. Christian will send you an email so you have his contact information, and so you can reach out to him. He'll be your main point of contact from the staff side. And the other thing we wanted to share with you is the Title 18 update. We are on part 6 of 6. So you all have been involved with various sections and chapters. And so we're at the last bucket. And the last meeting on that is August 25th. We will send you a link to the packet. We'd planned a lot of joint meetings and didn't want, trying to balance the workload of different boards and commissions. We did not set this up as a joint meeting, but wanted to kind of tell you about this particular topic that's on the agenda for August 25th. It pertains to process and procedures. So during the early stages, you'd given us the feedback of the role of Development Commission, what comes to you all, what stays with the staff administrative level, and so on and so forth. So we've taken that feedback and proposed this draft where some of the discussion we want to have with the Planning and Policy Commission is the size of the buildings that fall within the administrative review versus the Development Commission review. Of course, we're taking in what's in the code currently and proposing a couple of options to kind of streamline the process a little bit and make it more clear and consistent and fair. The second thing in that bucket is, you all had said perhaps there should be an interim administrative decision for technical things like the geotechnical reports and critical area reports. So we've built that into the process where the focus for the Development Commission would be on a very clear criteria. So we've added the new criteria for site development review. So all of that will be packaged, and we'll send you a link. Up to 3 members of the Development Commission can attend without making a quorum on that meeting if you would rather attend the meeting in person or virtually, or in person. But no more than 3 can attend unless we have to notify it as a public meeting. Or if you don't have the time and want to send us your comments by email, that would be great too. But honestly, I think we really, really appreciate the value you brought to the Title 18 update and your excellent comments for all the previous chapters. So this is the home stretch for the first round. Of course, there'll be the consolidated draft that'll come out of after the bucket 6. So that's all in terms of announcements. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other items of business or announcements from staff? There being no further business before the commission, this meeting is adjourned at 8:43 p.m. Thank you.